Hey, welcome to Wine Talks with Paul K. And we are in Southern California today. Not a beautiful day. Actually, it's a little bit on the rainy side here in Monrovia. About to have a conversation with Tonya Pitts up in San Francisco. Well, introductions in just a moment. Wine Talks, of course, available on iHeartRadio, Pandora, Spotify, wherever you hang out for your podcasts. And have a listen to a show just released with Leah Pavetta from Glenelly Estates in South Africa. Incredible conversation about the Bordelais and the proprietor and the whole history of wine, but not why we're here. We're here to have a conversation with Tonya Pitts, a somm, a writer, a wine judge, a food consultant, an award, numerous awards in the wine industry. Welcome to the show.
Hi, Paul. Thank you for having me on today.
It's great to have you. It's good to see you. I've read a lot about it. Some interesting stuff to talk about when it comes to the wine world. The inclusion part of our industry. The fact that you're a wine star and the teachings you're doing. But first, you corrected me on your name, and you said it's Tonya, but it's spelled kind of
Yes.
Tanya. But your
hmm
mom, this is just fun. I was fascinated to hear this. Watched Doctor Zhivago, loved the movie apparently, and that's how your name
Yeah.
came about.
Yes, that's exactly right. She saw Dr. Zhivago many, many times, and she tells me it's all Omar Sharif's fault that
That's so funny.
you are named Tonya.
My father passed recently, and I was going through his effects last week with my brother and sister, and I found you know how you get a birth certificate which has got the stamp on it, and that's your name, right? So it says Paul
Right.
on there. But then we found that document that's before the birth certificate, and apparently my mother wanted to call me Drake, and I'm like, where did that come from? I know Drake.
Yeah.
So somebody changed their mind between that document and the actual birth certificate, and spared my life, I think, with all that. But so, were you born and raised in California? Are you from the United States, or where were you born?
I was actually born and raised in St. Louis,
Ah, okay, the Midwest.
Missouri. I am a Midwesterner originally, but I've lived in California and San Francisco for probably 30 years now. Yeah.
I was reading about that. And San Francisco is such a fascinating part of town, and because it was really cutting edge for the world of cuisine in America in the 70s and 80s. And if it wasn't cutting edge at the moment, it was certainly parallel to what was going on in LA and New York. Is that what drew you to San Francisco? Is this idea of wine and food and chasing that?
Yeah, no,
No.
no.
No, we froze.
St. Louis and was attending St. Louis University and decided halfway through, a little more than that, that really wanted I wanted to continue the arts, which I'd always painted. I'd always
Hmm.
gone to art school when I was younger, and a friend said, you should really go check out San Francisco. And I did. I went for a long weekend. It was much like you were talking about Southern California today. It was raining. It was in January, and I got off the plane and was standing on a terrace in Pacific Heights and looking across the city, and it felt like home. And so
Wow.
I dug my heels in that weekend and just walked around the city, was on public transportation, just checking things out, and went back home and did my research. I had worked in restaurants when I was a student as well. And so there was this love and fascination for food and wine early on. But to say that I would in my life's work doing that, I had no idea, you know. But I loved food and I loved wine. But, the restaurant that I was working in when I was in college was a French restaurant. And there were all kinds of people there, and they were all professionals and they had been in the industry for many years. And we would, in the evening, with family meal, and there was wine
Mm-hmm.
on the table. And
Mm-hmm.
while I couldn't drink because I was underage, I could sit and listen to the conversations. And one day I got up enough nerve to pick up the glass and just swirl and start talking about what I was
Wow.
smelling. And from there, I had someone kind of take me under their wing and show me everything,
This was in
within
St. Louis.
restaurant life. Yeah, this was in St.
Not
Louis.
not necessarily the hotbed of cuisine in America in
No, no,
talking about the
but I
90s,
was in a really special spot. This was actually in the 80s,
in the
so I'm
80s.
going to date myself on that one.
Yeah, we don't have to go
Um,
there.
no, but the restaurant I was working in, the folks that owned it loved wine, and the list consisted of champagne, Bordeaux, Italian wines, um, and a smattering of California wines. And so that's what I was able to smell. And when I could taste, I did, have those wines. But my first wine was um, a Lafitte. And
Well, of
I
course,
was,
naturally.
yeah, and when I tell people that story, they're like, huh? It's like, but, they liked first growths, but it was an opportunity for me to learn and to taste. And the person that I was working with put everything in front of me, because he saw that thirst and
Hmm.
just the passion. And I'm so grateful and thankful for that first mentor,
So
you know.
when you left St. Louis, having this experience, that you still weren't thinking you're going to get in hospitality. You were going to pursue the arts or whatever you want to do, and certainly
Oh yeah.
San Francisco is a place for that, for both, actually.
Oh, absolutely. I realized when I wanted to switch gears and go to art school, I had to wait a year in order to go to school and to get any kind of financial aid. So what do? I go get a job in a restaurant.
Hmm.
And I can remember those were the days that there was the glossy magazine that would come with the San Francisco Chronicle, and it was the restaurant issue. And I got a hold of one, someone sent to me, and I started looking at restaurants. And there was Zuni, there were stars that
Hmm.
had been listed, a couple of other French places as well. And I went into Zuni and tell you how green I was in doing this. I went at the end of the month. It was a Monday. Zuni's closed on Mondays. It was hot as blazes,
Hmm.
and the door was open. So I walked in. Um, Sylvie Dar, who was the wine director at the time, was up on a ladder. They got this huge bar and floor to ceiling windows. And I can remember seeing her standing on the ladder in a wife beater, jeans, and looking at me like, what's going on? And she came down and she talked to me.
That's
And
so
we
funny.
talked for like an hour and a half. And I gave her my resume and she told me to come back the next day. And I did. And that was the beginning. And
That takes courage, girl.
Jeremiah, yeah,
Just to
and
walk in a place like that, as famous as it was, and say, "Yeah,
yeah. And
you know."
I was lucky and blessed, that's how I look at it now. And that people saw something in me that I didn't know that was there completely, and
And,
it's been that way for
and
me.
blessed with the courage
Yeah.
to do
And
that.
and then I met Jeremiah Tower when I
Oh,
was
did you?
working there.
Wow.
Yeah, and I had no idea. I've never been the type of person that is starstruck. That way,
Hmm.
if someone is in to have a meal, you take care of that person, and you do it with grace. And my roommate was working at Stars, and I can remember she came home one day and she said, "They've seen you," and I was like, "Who's seen me?" She's like,
Uh,
"Jeremiah, Brian, they've seen you. They want you to come work at Stars," and I was like, "What?" I mean, well, that's
wow.
cool and everything, but I mean, I like Zuni. She said, but you should check it out. And I did. I went and I staged, and I asked if they would allow me to work at Zuni and Stars at the same time, which at that point was unheard of.
Sure.
But they did. They shared me, and I did that for as long as I could. And there was a point in time where I couldn't do both anymore. And so off to Stars I was completely.
That's an
But
amazing pedigreed place to start. fact, last night I have to tell you, last night I made a pumpkin cream pie using pastry cream, and the recipe
Uh-huh.
comes from the Stars dessert book, which is a
Oh yeah.
fascinating book. It's really, I mean, it's beautiful pastry cream. And my daughter's a boulanger
It's
in New York, and so she says you got to use this book, Dad, because it uses real traditional French methods. So, what were you doing at the two restaurants at the time? Were you working the wine side of things, or are you just hospitality in general?
I was hospitality in general, and I was waiting tables, and again, captain, being a captain. But it was at that point where I kind of got pulled in. Whenever wine got opened, I was one of those that they would call into the cellar to have a 2 minute spiel about the wine, either taste and smell, and back off onto the floor we went, right? And
Sure.
I met Loretta Keller when I was working at Stars, Chef Loretta Keller.
Mm-hmm.
And when she left Stars, she opened Bizou, and I followed afterwards. And in the midst of that, she looks at me and she said, I need a wine director. I need a sommelier. You can do this. And basically talked me
Wow.
into it. And I did it. And I took over the program. And that was my first gig.
That's
So,
amazing.
yeah.
I want to actually touch on that just for a minute because you received the Wine Star winner. I think it was Wine Enthusiast of 2022. So
Yeah.
you've come a long way. But it seems to me, and I've been through this a little bit, that this job of sommelier, and you're at One Market restaurant currently, correct?
Yeah.
So this job as som, is it dramatically different than it was in the 80s? The heyday of the restaurant surge in America, and the rise of chefdom in America, where people in America started to realize that being a chef was a critical career. The French have known this for 100 years, but is the job different than it was then?
I think it depends upon where you are and where you're working and the type of restaurant that you're working in, whether it's, an independent or if it's a part of a corporation. And especially
Mm-hmm.
now, after the pandemic,
Mm-hmm.
we're all working with far less. And it it's hard, because you're doing more than the job of a wine director or a sommelier, which is my role.
Right.
After I got started with Bizu, those are the only types of jobs that I did and have done, right? And they're different now. I would maybe do some floor shifts managing a
Mm-hmm.
combination, but now it's like there's a lot of that
Right.
and you're short staffed. There's a lot of managing people, more managing of floor staff right now than you used to do, especially because you just don't have enough hands, you don't have enough people. And so
There was
currently, that's what I'm doing too.
there was
I
that.
mean, I could always do that, and I've done a lot. I've been a general manager as well, but now it's different. And especially in San Francisco, I think um, the rise of neighborhood restaurants has been coming on strong for the last 7, 8 years. And that's where people are at right now. They're going to neighborhood restaurants. Um, they're still going to their old favorites, but if it's a bigger restaurant, I don't think that they're going um, as often as they used to,
Mm-hmm.
because those are business people, especially, where I am in the financial district, and a lot of the business people haven't all gone back to work yet either.
It's when I started this career 30 years ago, if you had your master som or your master of wine or your Witset wasn't even as popular then, but you could get a 6-digit job in Vegas. That was like the holy grail of work, and you
Yep.
just did one thing: you processed order the wines and worked the floor to help people select. And I think you're saying that's not the job anymore,
No.
partially because of, I think, the economies of scale of restaurants. It's hard to make a dollar in the restaurant business.
Right.
But so now you're doing all kinds of things. Have you had the same? I mean, I have this problem now, and I'm a small retailer, basically, or internet retailer, with finding trained personnel that understand what you're doing when they walk in the door, and having to train everybody that walks in the door. Have you seen a change? I mean, it's horrible for us, and I'm in hospitality as well, customer service department.
Yeah.
Finding trained people, is this a problem in the food industry as well?
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely. You know, and if someone has, it's like the old days. If everyone is teachable,
Yeah.
everyone is teachable,
We
but they
hope.
have to want, well, but they have to want to be taught, you know?
I think
And
you're right.
and I think that that's what we've learned. That's what we grew up on in the industry, in the business. You know, you could have someone that started out as a back waiter
Mm-hmm.
or, as a busser.
Mm-hmm.
And if they really had the drive and the tenacity, they could work their way up. But
Much like you.
they had to show that that's what they wanted to do. And then someone would mentor them and take them under their wing and do that with them. And I think we're starting to see that now more than ever. You know, I've always had really wonderful and fantastic mentors um, in my life and in my career. And that's something that I've always passed along. If someone showed an interest, a real earnest interest, I mentored that person and I helped that person. And I didn't even look at it as that originally because of the way that I structured um, my work around teaching the staff. They would
Let's see.
always taste wine. I would always write all my notes, my own notes, and they would be very detailed to give them, background information and all of that. But I learned early on if people didn't understand what they were tasting and smelling and selling, chances are that it's not going to sell.
Mm-hmm.
You have to have people on your team and behind the product in order for it to be successful. Otherwise, you're going to be sitting there and hand selling it all yourself. That's not smart. That's not a good way to do business.
Seems that industry, our industry, is so much about mentoring because it does take someone with a lot of passion to work the hours that you work, to deal with the clients as you do, to all it takes to run a restaurant, the hours and the time and the commitment, and being close to the industry, not only in the wine side but the restaurant side as well. It takes somebody like you that recognizes there's a person with passion, because you when I went to, let me put it this way, we toured the country looking for cooking schools for my daughter to attend, and she ended up in France at Alain de Cassa's place. But it seemed to me most of the pitches that were going on CIA and Cordon Bleu and those places was not about like you're going to learn this passionate industry and become and do something with yourself. It was like, well, you can avoid college and you can get your AA degree here, and it's an escape from the traditional methodologies of getting a career. And it didn't seem to be geared toward kids or adults that want to embrace the passion of what it takes to do this industry, because you can't learn it all in cooking school. You can learn how
No.
to dice and cut and do all those things in some of the chemistry, but you can't learn that floor exercises that you go through to make a client happy, which is what it's about. And so that leads me to this next question, which is, okay, so we have the shortage of trained personnel, and it's obvious when you go to a restaurant. The people,
Yeah.
right? You sense it every minute. Is this going to allow you, for what one of your mentorship roles, to bring in people of color, to bring in underprivileged people, to bring in the LGBTQ community to train in this? Is this an opening for us to raise the inclusion in the industry?
Absolutely. But I think and I said this in my interview when I was talking to Tom Matthews. People have to remember there was a time in the restaurant community, because the restaurant community and hospitality has always been open and inclusive, that there were people from all walks of life that were
Hmm.
working in restaurants. You know, gay people, LGBTQ, you know, Black, Latin, Asian. There was everything. There
Hmm.
was a time that you saw everything in a restaurant,
Hmm.
and that was the '80s, and the early '90s, which were the heydays, even the '70s,
Yeah.
right? So everything is really kind of coming full circle again, is how I see it. And anyone and everyone that is interested and wants to be here and has a passion for it is welcome, as they
I
have
think
always been.
it's an interesting approach, and I mean an interesting concept because yes, if you anywhere you went, you would see all kinds of folks working in the industry, and some obviously want to be there, and some don't want to be there. But I think that's true. I think in general the industry has been inclusionary to all, but then you see particularly with women. This is quite a big movement right now, and there's a lot of highlights to women in the wine business, and certainly in the world of chefing. That was a slow moving needle
Right.
for the women in that industry. But now it seems to be breaking loose, and so I'm wondering, on your standpoint, do you think it's because of the press and because it's been noticed that there are less women in this industry that it's raised, or it's just because you guys have better palates than we do anyway, so you should you should be you should be in the industry. What have you seen?
It's a gender. It's gender. It's
Yeah.
gender. It's gender, and then it's race. If you don't have people around you, how do you know to pull,
Hmm.
from those sectors? Which is why um, all of these initiatives have been put together. I'm one of the ambassadors and mentors for Wine Unify. Um, I've been very instrumental in Badinage Forum, which is for women within the industry. I ran the hospitality department for a couple of years and had to step back because I became my mother's caregiver.
Hmm.
And so, but and I'm also on the United Sommeliers Foundation's board as well. So there are all of these initiatives that started because they needed to be there. Um, and there was some movement, but it wasn't enough movement for everyone. And I think that's now why we're starting to see more women, more people of color, more LGBTQ people highlighted within our industry, because there were some, but there weren't enough. And
Hmm.
it's the same with winemakers. They were female winemakers, but not enough, right? Which is why I started Women in Wine at the restaurant. I did that for many years as well. And it was, a festival that I held for a month, featuring female winemakers that
Hmm.
I brought into the restaurant um, for this big tasting, and became a way for women to network, not just in hospitality, but in other sectors um, as well, and to draw attention to women that were winemakers. And the same thing with, Black History Month, and featuring an African American chef paired with Chef Mark Doman, and then having wines highlighted that were created and produced by, a Black
Hmm.
winemaker. But you have to understand that all of these components were already there on the wine list anyway, you know, not
Just bring
necessarily
highlight to them.
highlighted. Yeah,
Yeah.
they weren't highlighted. They didn't have their own section, but they were there. And it gave me an opportunity to to feature these people on the floor and talking about the wines. And the same thing with staff. That's why I had everyone taste wine almost every day. We would do lineup and we would taste wine. If it wasn't me talking about wine, I would have someone else come in and talk about wine because I couldn't get to every table all the time. People had to feel empowered to do their jobs, right?
Were
And
they
have some
surprised when
passion about what they're doing.
they heard this and tasted these wines? Like, oh yeah,
Oh,
women can actually
sometimes.
make
Oh,
one.
absolutely. Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah.
You know, it's
You know what
I,
people say.
well,
They don't
I've
mean to say it, but it
I had
comes
a
out.
young I had a young intern here during the summer, and uh, she wrote all my talking points for the show, and particularly she was fascinated 'cause she wants to be a winemaker, so she's now sending out resumes to schools, her with her scores and things to get into places like Davis or Fresno, whatever, to get an enology degree. But she was born of this fascination, and I've set her up with a couple of tours of wineries in Napa. Um, Mullah Hill at Sequoia Grove at the time, to tour around and get inspired by this. But it's fascinating for me for people that you have to highlight it, and then they go, wow, they really can make one. That's really great. What would you think? I want to go back. I'm going to go back to the '70s for a second. Um, and I had her on the show here. Her name was Joanne Dupuis. She's 94 now, but she was the woman that took Stephen Spurrier around Napa Valley to find the wines for the
Yeah.
Judgment of Paris. And
Right.
she in our podcast, she talks about being the first woman ever to address the Napa Valley Vintners Association and having a conversation with like Brother Timothy, which is fascinating to me. But
Yeah.
at that time, Chateau Montelena was for sale. Mr. Barrett, who's one of my dad's customers and local in Palos Verdes, was trying to buy something to hedge some tax issues. That's what agricultural tax credits. But what would have happened? This is between you and me speculation. We don't know the answer. If a woman did want to buy Chateau Montelena at that time, this is 70, 69, 70, 71, something like that, or a person of color, or even a minority of other race, do you think there would have been headwinds? Because look at the Napa Valley Vineyard Association. Well, I'm just hashing through my thoughts. There's Martini, Louis Martini. He was Italian. A lot of Italians there. But do you think there would have been, pushback on this? Just theoretically?
There's a possibility, there's a possibility when there's something new and different.
Certainly would have been rare,
Not
right? It would have been
everybody,
rare.
yeah, not everybody thinks outside the box, right?
Right.
They don't.
It's interesting.
Comfortable to us, what's easy, what's familiar is usually the way that go with things, right?
It's
But
true.
it's always when you're the first, it's difficult. It's not an easy road.
No.
It's not. It's isolating, it's lonely, it's tough. It really is, you know.
You teach classes regularly, or is it sort of as an educator, do you host periodic things, or do you sort of feel, hey, people come, hey, I want to learn about this, and you just sort of mentor them directly? What's your typical dissemination of your education and wine knowledge?
Well, now what I do is I have mentors that I work with. I'm sorry, mentees that I work with um, through various um, organizations. Whereas before, someone would just ask me, and I would do that. But because of time constraints, it's not as easy anymore. But usually, when I'm teaching, it's usually for an event, is usually what it is.
Mm-hmm.
Or someone has me to do wine tasting and things like that. Um, During the pandemic, I did a lot of that, a lot of virtuals,
Mm-hmm.
whereas I'm used to doing that really, in person.
Mm-hmm.
I am, you know. I actually did something. I did something earlier in October for a group of neurologists, and that was fun because the
That could have been
wines,
nerve wracking.
yeah, yeah, and the wines that I chose, I gave the organizer just the rundown of the wines and who the people were, what the wines tasted like, and she absolutely loved it. And I pulled wine from women and from people of color, um, from different regions that people hadn't necessarily tasted. Everything was from California. And then I had one tried, true, and blue, as I like to call it, um, that you would probably see everywhere, but that was classic
Mm.
California.
Mm-hmm.
And which was really cool. And there were a lot of favorites from people, but there were a lot of eye opening experiences. And it's what I talk about, that aha moment when
Mm-hmm.
someone has something and the light bulb goes off and everything just kind of clicks. Um,
Isn't
it
that
was one
fun?
of those moments. And I
That's the
do,
best.
I love that.
Yeah.
I love that when you hit the nail on the head and it's success, right? But you've also turned someone onto something completely new and different that they have never had before, or you've changed their mind on something, you know,
You were
like they
you.
don't like Chardonnay.
Yeah. How many times do you hear that? I don't like Chardonnay. Well, you only drink Rombauer. That's the problem. And if you try some other things, you might find there's other character. But you talk about on your site
Everything
and,
doesn't
and,
have to
and
be
some.
oaky.
No, it doesn't have to be. Well, I say chewing on popsicle sticks. Um, but you talk about that wine should take you places. How do
Yeah.
you convey that concept during these tastings? What is it? This is a tough question because I agree with you, and I want to peel this back a little further. But I want your first initial concept, the opinion of wine should take you places.
Well, when I say wine should take you places, wine can transport you to a different country, a different region, a different part of the world, without physically going there.
Mm-hmm.
There are particular sights, sounds, and smells that are attached to a particular place. And if you've ever seen pictures of the region or anything that is attached to that, it gives you just a little bit of an insight to what that place is like in that particular place. And I think for me, how I process when I taste a wine and when I come back to that wine again after having not had it for a while, I can go back to that moment when I tasted that
Mm-hmm.
wine.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and that's where I came, that's how I came up with that. If I can do that, that's an opportunity for someone else to have that same experience.
It
Yeah.
is, Mike Salacci at Opus. The first time I ever heard this was from him, which was, wine is a sense of time, vintage, and
Yeah.
place, and so,
Yeah.
and it takes a lot of practice for us to start to sense that and understand it. And so here you are. We need to now convey this to the regular consumer, and it's such an important part of our industry to do as not our persona as people that work in the wine industry, but it's much harder to convey. But how do we get them off of 19 Crimes and Josh and Martha Stewart's Chardonnay, and how do we? Is this a hand sell to the consumer to teach them this concept, this idea? You can be transported with a glass of wine.
Well, it takes us back to this. Where you have that cocktail, where you have that glass of wine, that bottle of wine in that moment, that is creating a memory.
Mm-hmm.
What you are consuming is attached to that memory. So why not make it absolutely fantastic?
You mean
That's the
life's too short to
start.
drink bad wine? Like we go
That's
back to the
that's
bumper
the
sticker.
start. Yeah, but that's the start.
Yes.
But if you listen to someone and ask them what they like to drink, and they give you certain characteristics, and sometimes it's like pulling a rabbit out of the hat because sometimes people don't know how to convey that or the right words to use.
Mm-hmm.
So when you talk to people, you have to really sit and listen to what they're saying and discern it. And you can do that. A good sommelier, a good wine director, a good retailer, that person can they can discern that and they can give someone something that they like and something that they want.
It's a
And
talent.
that's how you do that. But you have to build trust,
Mm-hmm.
building trust as well within this. But
Yeah.
when you give that person something else other than what they normally have, wow, you've opened the floodgates, which I think is where we are right now because people couldn't get together.
Mm-hmm.
They were ensconced in their homes. They had to order wine
Mm-hmm.
if they didn't have a cellar or whatever, or couldn't get to a store or whatever their situation was. Or if they belonged to a wine club or they were on wine.com or Bevmo or Total, they had to pick up wine that they necessarily had never had before. I call that discovery mode. People are still in discovery mode. Lucky
Mm-hmm.
for us that people are still in discovery mode because now we can sell people, some of those people that would usually drink Rombauer, 19 Crimes, um, whatever, barefoot. You can open a whole new world for them because it's available to them, because it's being presented to them. You can go on a website now to order wine and try and find something, and you can hit a flavor profile and wines pop up for you
Mm-hmm.
to buy. Whereas, we didn't have that before.
Well, that's an interesting point because I'm in that industry, and I was going to ask you this next question, but I wanted to just touch on that for a second. What you just said, which is this aha moment, and that comes from it could be lucky that the som or the waiter picks a wine that they're gonna like. They may not like it. If somebody describes a wine that they like based on some rough profile characteristics, but we didn't get it right. I had a buyer here in my old wine shop. The guy was so talented at that when he would ask, "What do you usually drink?" and point them in the direction in our shop that had something similar or that he thought they would like. But that's very talented and very hard to do. And so you have these algorithms now. You know, do you
Yeah.
drink black coffee? Do you salt your food? And do you like mushrooms?
Mm-hmm.
And here's my position on it. I had a Canary Islands Liston Negro not too long ago that I flipped over. I mean, just unbelievable. I'm
Yeah.
like, I didn't even know they had wine at Canary Islands, and I had never tasted this
Yeah.
grape before. And let's just say that I fill out the form on a website where I answered those questions. They're never going to send me Liston Negro from the Canary Islands
No,
because they don't even.
absolutely.
How
They
are they
are
going to
not.
define that?
They are not. Someone has to put it in their glass and put it in their hand and turn them onto it. That, my friend, is called the hand sell.
That's the answer. Because that same argument, and I was with James Suckling over the weekend at a big fancy, I mean, a really crazy port tasting. I'm thinking it's probably the port tasting of the century. There's like only 30 people allowed to come because there's only some of the
Wow.
bottles were the last bottles to exist.
Uh-huh.
And I was talking to James Suckling about the point system, and you probably have an opinion, but um, and he had an interesting response. But my problem with it in general is that Liston Negro may get a 95, and you may have a 95 point Napa Valley Cab on your list at one market, and they're completely different wines. So the point buyer, what does this suggest? I guess it suggests that at least we know that for Napa Valley Cab, that's a very good version of one, or the
Well, they're apples and oranges. They're not the same. So we
right.
can't put them in the same category. There is a wine drinker for a 95 point cab, and there is a wine drinker for that 95 point Canary Island wine
Yeah.
as well, which those wines are so hard to come by. Now they're doling them out. It's really awful.
Yeah, what's been the temperature of wine? You have
Sucks.
600 wines according to your article on your list
Yeah.
at one market, and that's sort of bucking the trend of what's going on post COVID because it's so hard to get wines
Oh,
and to get a
well, you
steady
know,
stream of it.
we didn't sell our cellar. We kept the cellar. Um,
Wow,
I was actually I was pushing 1,000 a couple of years ago, and they asked me to dial it back and reel it back, which I did. But it's a big place. It's 448 seats.
wow, that's big.
Externally, yeah, externally, there's another dining room, private dining room slash retail space, art gallery, that seats 100. And then I have a pavilion area, the atrium area where I can do events as well, and 500 people could be out there. Um, but that's a whole different ball of wax when that happens.
That's a
Um,
big place, so 448 seats
yeah,
is huge.
it is, but it takes up, half the city block there on Market Street. It's number one Market Street. It is the
Hmm.
address, for the building.
Wow,
And, but, there was a time where the business could support that. And the world was everyone's oyster. It still is, right? Um, I don't, I never have kind of reined people in and said, you can only have these wines to choose from. And I figured they're coming to one market for this fantastic culinary experience.
hmm,
So it should be completely well rounded that way. Same thing with the wines. If I can get it from the winery, we can have it. And we did. And we still do. Sometimes that's something that someone wants. Um, but, the restaurant would like me to shrink even more, um, which it will fluctuate depending upon the time of the year. Right now at 600, it's pretty high, but that's because I've got conventions. I have holidays coming up. We do a lot of large events, as well. I've added imports into the mix, whereas imports only lived in the wine and wall space. And I, over the years, have been selling them on the floor anyway. The big joke and secret was what's in Tonya's secret treasure trove, and
hmm.
what is she gonna pull out, which it's still kind of that way because I have the relics, as I like to call them, left over from God knows when that are just tucked away in the cellar
That's
that
great.
haven't been on the list in 10 years. And
That's great.
I'll bring it out and sell it, hand sell it on the floor.
I don't know if the consumer understands the restaurant client because and I have two questions here. But the first one is a list of 600. If I walk into a restaurant, I can tell you if this restaurant's been list has been curated by Southern or by RNDC or any other
Right.
larger wholesaler because they do you favors if you do. They'll give you a deal on the vodka if you buy the wines and vice versa. But 600 wines, and being as particular as you are about the list, you must have dozens of vendors to deal with, which for the listener, when a restaurant has a list like that, that's more checks to write, more ACH transfers, more bookkeeping, and so post pandemic, it's been clear that restaurants are trying to peel that, consolidate some of that, and so they go with more wines from Southern, which is all the basic stuff you see at the market. Is not managing a 600 wine list rather complicated?
No, not really.
No,
Because
there goes
it's
that
been
idea.
bigger. No, I mean, it's been bigger. I worked with all sorts of lists over, my
Yes,
several decades, more than two, career. I've worked with smaller lists, much smaller lists. I've worked with, a big list. Um, but the thing is, Paul, you have to have something for everyone that walks in the door.
hmm,
And that's what I've been able to create everywhere I've been. And you have to realize that you have to have something for everyone that walks in the door. People need to be able to look at your wine list and see things that are familiar or comfortable to them. They can't look at it and say, "Oh my God, I don't know anything. I don't know any of these wines," right?
Right. No, that's
And if
important. So,
yeah, if you're getting that, it's, you want it to be able to get the awards and all of that, but you also want some sense of familiarity because you want people to pick up the list, go through, and be able to choose something on their own if they want to, and if they can do that, if they have the skill set to be able to do that, because not everyone feels comfortable doing that.
mm-mm.
But I recently changed the format for the wine list, and it's basically a big baker sheet, is what I did, front and back, which I'm still trying to get everything on it, and it's been a struggle because I didn't want to have a lot of pieces of paper, um, like a reserve list and all of that,
Mm-hmm.
which I
Mm-hmm.
changed the name. It's like I don't want it to say reserve list because it never said that in the wine list. And when I had the book, it was called Old and Rare and gave a description of what that meant, right?
Mm-hmm.
Um, so what it says now on the new list, it's called Deep in the Cellar. That is what it's called. And so that
Clever.
lets you know deep in the cellar. It's like, what?
That's
Okay,
clever.
what does that
Really
mean? I
clever.
was like, hey, deep in the cellar. It's old. It's got some age on it. It's got some character. We're gonna have to pull it out, dust off the cobwebs, all that stuff. However you want to think about it,
That's exciting. So
you
when I
know.
come up, that's what we're going to do. We're going to go deep into the cellar. You started your career at a French restaurant. You had Lafitte there. Let's just call that old world. I mean, it's French
Yeah,
cuisine is a fascinating subject for me. I study it. I read about it. I think it's great. And because I believe, as you probably do, that culturally wines grow up with their foods and vice versa. And so there's a
right.
reason why the Burgundians taste and drink what they and eat what they drink, and the Bordelais and the Tuscans and
Right.
all the rest of it. And then we have America, which has no rules. And
Yeah.
so there's 2 points to this. One is I'm envious as an American growing up in the beach community in Southern California, which is probably as far away from cultural exposures anywhere. That the French, for instance, protect their butter, they protect their cheeses, they protect their wines, but the French sometimes will look at that and say, "Wow, we're hogtied to what we can do and make and serve with it, right?"
Right.
And you started your career there, and now we're in a new world place where you can serve whatever you want, and you can create recipes of what normally would have made people cringe back in the day. How do you deal with that when it comes to pairing foods? How do you look at a meal or so let's say somebody orders something at the restaurant and they're looking for your suggestion to pair it? What are you looking at? You looking at the
It's
flavor profile? You're looking at the weight of the food? What are you looking at?
it's very interesting and it's exciting. No matter what meal I'm having, whether it's, um, a hamburger, um, and yes, I do sometimes go and get a chicken sandwich, from
You can
a
admit it. Don't
place
worry
that I
about
shouldn't, right? Um, always thinking about what would I pair with this, especially if I'm tasting a wine. I'm always thinking about a food and
it.
wine
Mm-hmm.
pairing.
Mm-hmm.
And what's really exciting now is to being able to have um, a wine and think about a particular food that's in front of you, the texture, the weight, and the flavor profile, and be able to pair a wine with it that you normally wouldn't see with that
Mm-hmm.
dish at
Mm-hmm.
all. And I thank Evan Goldstein for that with daring pairings, to open the door and the gateway for people to think that way and to say, hey, it's okay, and this is how we should be looking and thinking about food and wine pairings as well. We don't have to be tied to the traditional. The
Mm-hmm.
traditional is great when we have it and it works. It's astounding. It's mind blowing. It creates these really fantastic memories, but also the unusual pairing does the same thing. There was a dish once that chef did, and it was Alaskan halibut with um, served on a potato and leek gratin with a um, God, what is it? With a Morlaix sauce with a red wine
Hmm.
sauce,
Wow.
and people were like, "Why did he do that? Why did he put that particular type of sauce with a fish?"
Hmm.
And the dish was absolutely stunning. But then we were like, okay, what are we going to do for wine? Okay, we can't do Pinot Noir. Pinot Noir is is not going to stand up to the
Would have
richness
got
of
yeah,
this
would have got
dish. It's
lost in
just
that
going
one.
to fall and fail,
Yeah.
right? Okay, Cabernet, can't do that either. Even if we were to go Old World, still may not work as well because of the tannins. And I thought, you know what? Let's do this. And I was very particular. I went and grabbed a bottle of Skipstone Fault Line, which um, is Philippe Malka was at that point the project that he was working on in Sonoma,
Hmm.
and it was 100% Cabernet Franc that was
Wow.
coming from it's probably 40 different parcels that he was pulling from to make the Skipstone wine itself. But this was a parcel of Cap Franc that he decided that was very distinctive and needed to have its own bottling. And that's what we used.
Wow.
Oh my God. It was delicious. It was really, really fantastic. And it had lots of layers. The fruit was really supple. It was fairly silky. There were some tannins, there was some tension,
Hmm.
but it absolutely played well with everything on the plate. And it was
That's
just
a
glorious.
fascinating pairing because Cab Franc has good structure, particularly with Sonoma. It has a
Right.
yeah, unlike
Yeah.
its European counterparts, it would have depth to it. That's so
Yeah.
interesting. Let
It
alone
was
fish with
good.
red sauce on it.
Yeah. And I'm just like, can you do that again? And it's always funny to talk to a chef because we remember their dishes. They don't always remember their dishes. And that's been my experience anyway. I've had several chefs that I've worked with. Do you remember the pappardelle that
That's
you did
funny.
with the rabbit and Dijon mustard and apples and blah, blah? No, I don't remember that at all. It's like, oh my God, that was so good.
You
Can
just
you dig
triggered a
out the
thought.
recipe?
You just triggered a thought because we've already discussed the sense, the memory sense of the nose or smell, food. It's so memorable, and you can be 10 years past or 15 years past an experience, and then smell that same thing and take you back, and that's so important.
Oh yeah.
And I just thought of something when you were talking about the chefs you've worked with. I had a conversation a couple days ago with an old school vendor of wine here in Southern California, and we were talking about a couple of restaurants that have up and out and failed, who had good programs at some point, both wine and food. A new chef comes in and they ruin it. And how much pressure uh, on a chef who's got ideas, he or she trying to manipulate something, make a mark for themselves, but just can't get it right, and it tanks everything. Isn't that there's just a ton of pressure to come up with these ideas, particularly in the new world, since you're not working with the standard recipes that you can modify a little bit so that people in France would know that you're having something in particular. But man, you come here and you want to make a name for yourself. This is tough.
Slow and steady wins the race. You don't take the whole thing and throw it out the water. You don't throw the baby,
Out with
out
the
with
bathwater.
the tub
Yeah.
water. Yeah, you don't do that. You you make small, incrementations of adding
Hmm.
things that are yours and your signature. You don't take everything away, you know,
Seen it
because
happen.
as we yeah, but we talked about this earlier. People coming back to places that they love, that are comfortable, that have meaning for
Hmm.
them. Those are
Hmm.
memories that are attached to that. don't mess around with their memories. Not too much,
Right.
anyway. You know,
So
you
it's
can't.
a fascinating
Yeah,
part of our industry. Wine, for me particularly, somewhere around 100,000 wines we've tasted here, and sometimes they'll bring one back. It's 5 years later. You know, it's
yeah,
just aged in the bottle, and I go, well, I've already had this. And they're like, what do you mean? I
yeah.
look it up in the computer, and it's buried somewhere in your senses of memory, your memory
Hmm.
senses of what you've had and what you've been. And I think you made a very important comment about the experience, and I used the word. I wrote it down because I want to use it myself. The is attached. You've attached this wine to that
Yeah,
experience, whether it's food
yeah.
or location or company that's attached, and you can remember that. We're already
Oh,
almost in
yeah.
an hour. I can't believe this,
I
and
know.
not even halfway
It's
through all my points.
well, and I call it the Rolodex. It's the Rolodex of memories, the Rolodex of sights and sounds and wines. And sometimes if it's not prompted right away, I'll do this, the flipping through the Rolodex.
Yeah, right.
And just, the motion of it is sometimes kind of jars things. But yeah, because there's a lot there, right? But
Well,
they do change in the bottle.
I've got to come up. I did the podcast a couple of days ago, and I want to do it again with this gentleman. His name is Zachary Abbott. He runs a company called Z Biotics. He's down the street from you
Uh-huh.
in the Silicon Valley there. And I want to just tell you what he's done. He's a PhD in microbiology, and he's created a probiotic, a GMO probiotic that will allow your body to process alcohol smoother and faster and avoid hangovers.
Oh, wow.
And I was teasing him. I go, this is the stuff I see at the gas station, next to all these. He's like, no. He goes, this is real. I actually created this. But the point I'm making is, we got to come up. I want to sit with him live because it's so fascinating, and then we're going to come by one market, and we're going to tilt the glass together. This fascinating conversation, and continue this conversation again because I think we have a lot more to talk about, and we're going to run out of time here now. So thank you so much for being on the show, and I hope we can do it again soon.
Thank you so much, Paul, for having me on the show. I really enjoyed chatting with you. And that hour flew
That
by
was
so
fast.
quickly. And it seemed like it was longer than an hour because of how much we talked about,
Right. We
right?
touched on a lot.
Yeah.
Thank you again for the time, and we will let you know when we're up, and we'll do it again.
All right. Very good. Take care. Have a
Cheers.
great
Thank
day.
you. You too.
All right. Cheers. Bye.